in series. Thank you so much, Mishi, for the recording. The idea for today is really for each one of us is joining this call within a different point, in a different point of our learning experience of DRR. And today, the purpose of the session is to really come together to see like the first initial step. So, what is the UNDRR architecture? What is the Sendai framework? Really understanding why it's important for us as feminists, for us within our communities, with the understanding that DRR is critical to to everything that we do throughout our work and in so many different ways. So today we're going to understand why. We're honored to be accompanied by the UNDRR Secretariat, by DRR practitioners and experts, and we really think that today will be a session that will be engaging and there will be a lot of space for Q&A. This is a this is meant to be a learning and reflection space. We all know that we're coming from different places. So please feel free to write your name and your organization in the chat and also to write any questions that may come up. There are no questions that are not valid in this space. So anything that you're like, actually, I don't know what the Sendai framework is, that is also a valid question and that will also be tackled today. Other housekeeping rules, just we don't have interpretation today, so let's just be mindful of the language, of trying to speak a little bit slower, of trying to be a little bit more intentional when we speak so that folks from all over the world can have a wide understanding. Yeah, again, any flags, we will be monitoring the chat, so please let us know. And yeah, I apologize for not introducing myself. My name is Claudia Rubio. I am from the Dominican Republic and based in the Dominican Republic. And this topic is also dear to my heart because of the context of the DR. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I think with that, I'll pass on to my colleague Nishi.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for welcome of all our colleagues, member of the Women in Gender Stakeholder Group on DRR, but also we have invited other sister constituency like the Women Major Group, the Women in Gender Constituency, and CBD. So if you belong to any of those community, kindly do introduce yourself in the chat, and we really love to hear from you and the constituency that you belong in. As Claudia has said, as the Women in Gender Stakeholder Group on Disaster Risk Reduction, we felt it necessary for us to start these political learning sessions because we did get quite a lot of feedback from sisters and colleagues on the need to enhance understanding of the UNDRR architecture itself, Sendai framework in particular, but also how gender intersects with the disaster risk reduction, especially in the context where disasters are becoming frequent and more intense, and loss of life have been lost. So the need to really engage in the process is becoming more urgent. But also we have seen quite a strong link between disaster risk reduction and climate change. We have seen how disaster, for example, erode or contribute to the loss of biodiversity, but also we have seen how rights have been and gains that we have achieved on the rights are all been eroded in the context of disasters. So it was from that background that we thought there is a need to really invite our colleagues to have an in-depth understanding. So this is the first session, and then there will be other series of sessions that are coming, and we will also love to hear from you which other topics that you think will be interesting or you would love to learn from you. Today's sessions, we have two speakers, and our speakers are coming from the Secretariat of UNDRR. We are extremely privileged to co-host this session with them. We couldn't find any better speakers to do this than folks who work in the space themselves. So for today, we have done an introduction, and then we will do we'll have our colleagues, Tina, to do the disaster risk reduction deep dive, who will go through the architecture, what it is, the Sendai framework, and everything that you need to know. And then we'll also have Rice, who will introduce gender in the disaster risk reduction space. And then we'll have question and answer, and then we'll have a next step, including sharing with you the next series of sessions. So without further ado, if you could go to the next. Cloud, do you want to introduce the Women Gender Stakeholder Group?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you, Mishi. So, this is to briefly touch on why we're here, why this group is represented here today, and to give a little bit more context of the Women and Gender Stakeholder Group. The Women and Gender Stakeholder Group, similar to other groups, for example, the UNDRR Women and Gender Constituency, is a feminist constituency, but working specifically at the center, working to center gender equality, human rights, and intersectional justice in disaster risk governance. It is one of the 15 major groups and other stakeholders in global DRR under the Sendai framework. So it's under this, let's say, map of stakeholder groups. There's this growing membership and there's this growing interest across the board in this work. We've had key moments with the Sendai framework, particularly last year, but there's more up in the upcoming years. And this work, as Michi was saying, is really picking up traction because this is such a concrete way of seeing climate impacts and seeing many different impacts because we're not only talking about climate, but really of thinking what are the concrete ways that communities are affected by disasters and how do we tackle that from a policy standpoint and from a practical standpoint. There's this recognition that disasters are intensifying, that women, girls, and gender diverse people are always the most impacted, and that those existing inequalities are exacerbated. And with the understanding that this feminist engagement is no longer peripheral but essential, not only us as let's say the population that is most affected, but also as the agents of change of those who hold the solutions as well. So under this understanding, as Michi was saying, the WGSG really is coming together to build the capacity that we need within our group, but also to build the capacity in those those collectives that we are part of. This group is an open group, so at the end we will be sharing a link to join the WGSG as if it is of interest. So we'll share the link in a tiny bit. Today, we also have a quick Zoom poll that we would like to share just to know who is with us here during the call. We have two very quick questions. You should be able to see it on your screen right now. So the first question is, to which constituency or group do you belong? We know not everybody here belongs to a different group, but we wanted to make kind of gauge what the interest is and who is here present in the room. So question is the Women and Gender Stakeholder Group at UNDRR, UNFCCC Women and Gender Constituency, which is an allied constituency within the UNFCCC, CBD Women's Caucus, which talks about biodiversity, Human Rights and Climate Change Working Group, and other. So we're seeing some of these answers trickling in. We're seeing a lot of folks from the WGC, from the Women and Gender Constituency, other from the Women and Gender Stakeholder Group at UNDRR, CBD Women Caucus, and a lot of others. So there are a lot of people who are not affiliated to a specific group, which is also perfect because this session was supposed to be a wider session for folks to join and to learn about this process. Then for the next question, we have from 1 to 5, how would you rate your knowledge and experience with DRR and the Sendai framework? So 1 is just starting to learn, just dipping my toes in. 2 is, a little bit like deeper and starting to like get the gist of it. 3 is somewhat, so I'm at a medium level. And 4 is already starting to become an expert. And 5 is like, you're a pro. So I know we have a lot of pros here, but it's so good to see that we also have people who are just starting to learn and who are like at a somewhat level as well. So thank you so much for indulging us in that voting. It's great to see who is here and to really like reflect on what the different groups that are here and what the levels of knowledge are so that we can also tackle a session accordingly with that knowledge. So you may see the results on the screen briefly, but I think with that and to make up for any lost time, I can pass on to Tina, I believe, to Mishi beforehand to introduce Tina.
Thank you so much. And with that, allow me, if Cloud will allow Tina to share the screen, to introduce our colleague Tina, who has been an exceptional comrade and a friend supporting the coordination of the stakeholder engagement mechanism. Some, unlike other spaces in the UNDRR, all major groups come together under the umbrella of stakeholder engagement mechanism. And Tina has been quite a champion to get all of us stakeholders actively involved in this. And so, Tina, now you have the floor.
Many thanks, Claudia and Mishi, for those very kind words and for having invited me to also join this call today. It's a good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It looks like colleagues are joining from different parts of the world. A little bit of pressure because I saw many actually said that DRR, the Sendai framework, is exactly your cup of tea. So not only do we have a lot of experts, we also have a lot of pros in the room. If you, Claudia or Mishi, can share my slides. I'm so sorry. I just realized also that I have one video there that may not play when you show the slides, but we'll work with what we've got. So, hi everyone. My name is Stina Bellu, and as Mishi pointed out, I work very closely with her and colleagues as I am liaising or coordinating the UNDRR, a stakeholder engagement mechanism from the UNDRR side. I'm based in Geneva, so at the headquarters of UNDRR. We can go to the next slide. So I'll give a quick overview of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, and the Sendai framework. But before I dive into those topics, I will briefly cover some of the basic concepts about disaster risk reduction in general for kind of contextualizing the conversation. And at the end, I'll suggest some additional reading and actions for you to take after this call. But maybe let's get going. Next slide, please. So we still see many people referring to natural disasters. This is a little bit of a pet peeve for UNDRR, and hence we also have a big campaign around this to say there are no natural disasters, only natural hazards. Looking at the top images on the right, those are the hazards. They come in different sizes and types, but it is really our choices and our actions or the lack thereof that make us vulnerable. Those are the factors or the processes which increase the susceptibility of our communities to the impacts of hazards. Roughly speaking, a hazard doesn't turn into a disaster if we're not there. What turns a natural hazard into a disaster is often the consequence of human decisions that increase our vulnerability and exposure to risk. Are there people, infrastructure, housing, production capacities, and other tangible human assets located in hazard-prone areas? Therefore, you can say that hazard times vulnerability times exposure equals disaster. So the point about disaster risk reduction is really to prevent new and reduce existing disaster risk. We want to move from managing risk to preventing it, and hence shifting the global focus from a reactive disaster management to more proactive risk reduction, aiming to break that cycle of response and recovery. Next slide, please. As we have all witnessed, we're operating in a rapidly changing risk environment. Hazards are increasing in frequency, in intensity, and complexity, and their impacts are becoming more interconnected and systemic. Climate extremes, technological disruptions, health emergencies, cyber incidents, supply chain shocks no longer occur in isolation. They cascade across systems, sectors, borders, and regions with complex consequences that can often surprise us. The latest Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, GAR, highlights the scale of this challenge. While direct disaster losses are estimated at around $202 billion annually, the wider systemic and indirect impacts reach nearly $2.3 trillion each year. But the evidence is also very clear. Investments in disaster risk reduction are far more cost effective than responding after disaster strikes. For example, $1 invested in making infrastructure resilient in low and medium income countries can save up to $4 in avoided losses and disruptions. But we also know that investments in DRR not only curb disaster losses, but they also yield economic, social, environmental benefits that really enhance the well-being and resilience of countries and communities. Without a radical change in our thinking, in our actions, to address the economic and human costs of disasters, development gains will be significantly set back in affected countries, hampering the prospect of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Next slide, please. So now moving on to the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the bread and butter of UNDRR's work. The Sendai framework is really the global roadmap for reducing disaster losses. It has 7 global targets, 4 that need to be reduced, and 3 that need to be increased or enhanced. The expected outcome is really the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health. And in the economic, in the physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, societies, countries. So looking at the targets, as you see, Target A is about substantially reducing global disaster mortality. Target B is about substantially reducing the number of affected people. Target C is about reducing direct disaster economic losses. Target D about substantially reducing disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. And then moving to the other side, target E is about substantially increasing the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. Target F about enhancing international cooperation to supporting developing countries. Target G being substantially increasing the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments. So you also see on the slide some priority actions, the idea being that there is a need for focused action within and across sectors by states at local, national, regional, and global levels in those 4 priority areas. Moving forward, please. So, so we are now looking at, on this slide, the kind of current status. This is where we stand globally in implementing the different targets. You can see that with some targets, we're on track. We're on the right track, let's say, to achieve what was laid out. With some targets, we're already falling behind, and unfortunately, some are getting harder and harder to achieve by 2030. Next slide, please. So with all this being said, what are we as the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction then doing? I already mentioned that we are the kind of custodian of the Sendai framework, which means that we are also leading overall UN coordination of DRR. I had a video here that would play, but I know since this is a PDF that we're showing, it will most likely not show. Let's not worry about it. We move on to the next slide and we'll share the video with everyone after the webinar. So the video essentially just gave a good overview what you see on the left-hand side, that long list here, in terms of what it is that we as UNDRR do. We help cities become more resilient with the Making Cities Resilient program. We have the early warnings for all initiative. We convene people, experts globally, regionally, also nationally. We provide a lot of data. We publish a lot of research and reports. Prevention Web, I'll come back to that in a little bit. It's a global knowledge platform for disaster risk reduction, so a lot of information there. We run campaigns. I'll also touch on that in just a little bit. We drive public and private investment in disaster risk reduction and so on. So we do quite a bit, if you will. But the idea is that we're helping decision makers to better understand and make decisions based on risk. On the right-hand side, you will see our kind of, let's say, current priorities. So the new strategic framework has kind of sharpened further our focus. And these 4 areas are known as being catalytic. So risk knowledge, really the cornerstone of effective disaster risk reduction. Locally led DRR being about empowering communities and local governments to drive resilience, financing for DRR, driving a shift from reactive spending to risk-informed investment, and recovery readiness, so making resilient recovery the global norm instead of something happening after. If you're interested in knowing more about our current work, you can also have a look at the 26-27 work program. Both documents are available online, and we can share the links directly also after this presentation. Next slide, please. So you might then be asking, so what? With everything that we have done and we continue to do, what has changed? Here are 4 examples. So the average disaster-related mortality has been halved from per 100,000, it has gone down from 1.661 to 0.79 from 2005 to 23. Over 130 countries now have national DRR strategies in place. This has more than doubled since 2015. Over 60% of countries now report on having multi-hazard early warning systems, and over 600 cities are implementing DRR strategies through the Making Cities Resilient program. Next slide, please. I was also asked to provide a quick overview of UNDRR as an organization. So the Secretary General Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction, SRSG, Mr. Kamal Kishore, is the head of UNDRR. Our director is Paula Albrito. We are headquartered in Geneva. We have 5 regional offices, so in Bangkok, in Brussels, Cairo, Nairobi, and Panama City, and liaison offices in some key locations. The organization chart, which I recognize is quite small, it shows how our staff, 150-ish, is split into different branches and offices. Next slide, please. So a key element for everyone, but particularly for this audience, is to recognize the role of stakeholders, non-state actors. The Sendai framework and its midterm review specifically call for an all of society approach as being critical for effective disaster risk reduction. What it means is that we need all hands on deck to be able to reduce disaster risk and improve the resilience of societies. In 2018, the Stakeholder Engagement Mechanism, or SEM, as you know, it was established with Mishi being also part of the advisory group. The aim is to provide a space for stakeholders across constituencies to have a voice and take action in support of the Sendai framework. Next slide, please. Now, my last two slides, and then I'll end. I have noted down some actions or action items for your consideration, if you will. Starting with the International Campaign Days, many DRR professionals are familiar with the International Day for DRR, which is on the 13th of October, but UNDRR actually leads also two other international days. The first one on the list to be observed for the very first time next week, the International Day in Memory of the Victims of Earthquakes on the 29th of April. And the World Tsunami Awareness Day is then on the 5th of November. I definitely encourage you to make use of Prevention Web to understand disaster risk, share your work, and connect with others. You can submit blog posts, you can upload research papers, raise awareness about your upcoming events, share any insights that you have gained over the years. You can also submit a Sendai framework voluntary commitment. You share a commitment or an initiative, your activities, and you report back on how you are contributing to the implementation of the Sendai framework. Of course, if you haven't yet, engage in the stakeholder engagement mechanism. And Claudia and Mishi said that they will share details with you towards the end if you have not yet joined the Women and Gender group. And also, I wanted to note participation in regional platforms and, of course, the global platform. We had the global platform last year. It happens every 3 years, so the next one we still need to wait for. But next year, you will start seeing different regional platforms being organized around the world. So take note of those and please join. And then the next slide, please, which is my very last one. This list could have been very long, but let's say here are some resources to get you started if you want to learn more about UNDRR, our work, and about disaster risk reduction more broadly. But with that, I thank you and turn it back to Michi and Claudia.
Thank you so much, Tina, for a very detailed presentation on understanding the UNDRR, the work that you do, the organizational architecture, but also getting into Sendai, the targets, and giving us some of the chilling statistics of what is our disaster annual bill. Like looking at that number, it got a little bit scared. But again, you have said it quite well in terms of like how we can reduce this annual bill if we do a proper preventive work and disaster risk reduction. So with that, now after we have learned the general, and for colleagues, definitely if you have questions, just note that down. We'll open the space for question and answer. Both Tina and Rice will be here with us. So, but allow me now to invite Rice now to get us to the history of gender in the context. Welcome, Rice.
Thank you so much, Michi, and thank you, Tina, for giving me a very good start by laying out such a great introduction to UNDRR mandate. This is my first time interacting with the gender stakeholder group. It is my honor to meet with you all and to introduce myself quickly that I am new to UNDRR. Probably can still say that because I'm only 8 months old in UNDRR, joining just last year, taking over the portfolio from maybe my predecessor Branwyn, and hopefully continue to work with you guys and continue to advance all the great work on gender inclusion agenda. So let me share my screen quickly so you can see my slides. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so because we have such a diverse group of friends and colleagues here, some of you have indicated gender is your cup of tea. Some of you are newer to it. So I'm trying my best to sort of cover the ground with everybody, make it a little bit more interactive. And I'm tasked by Michi to walk through a little bit of history of gender in DRR, share some understanding in the gender in the Sendai framework, and what is the stage of play in terms of gender in the international disaster risk reduction plans and strategy before the Sendai Gender Action Plan, as well as some brief glance to the Sendai Gender Action Plan or Sendai Gap, which many of you have been very actively involved in shaping it. So before that, if you have a cell phone or a smartphone or whatever tools that you have, why don't you put it up and then join me on Slido and share with me when you hear gender or disability inclusion in DRR and climate action, what comes to your mind first? I think it might be helpful for me to know the lay of the land quickly. You could log on slido.com and put on those code, or you can just simply scan that and then come in and hold on your phone when you come into the Slido space, because just to keep you alert and interactive with me, there'll be a few more questions coming along the way interactively with our presentation here. So it's coming in inequality, empowering, recognizing intersectionality, vulnerabilities. Great. We will talk a little bit more about that. Hard to achieve. Nice. Yeah. Very challenging indeed. Just adaptation. Yep. There's a lot of equity, equality. I'm glad to see someone say intersectionality. I think that's a very not an easy kind of principle. It's probably not something extremely challenging for a lot of gender advocates, but I think to really realizing intersectional approach is still like a very, very challenging thing to see. And especially when we're in the space where a lot of focus on this disaster and climate change has been very, very technical. And sometimes when we get really technical around science and, technology and all of these work around climate and disaster, we tend to forget the very human elements of it, which is why we struggle to make an effective kind of interaction around here. So good, just to take a little bit of a pulse in terms of trying to understand where people are coming in. I like hearing dignity, cultural sensitivity. These are all very, very relevant. So I'm just kind of see the lay of the land and maybe like kind of move on, if you allow me, because we have limited time, so we have time to discuss as well. So based on that, why gender equality matters in DRR? And this might be a little bit of a, I don't know if it's a trick question, but it might be quite interesting to see where you're at, because I could go to a slide and tell you all of these things, but it would be good to see how many people see this. Why do we have to talk about gender in disaster risk reduction? And I think as recent as maybe 6-7 years ago, there was there's not a whole lot of awareness in the mainstream stakeholders in general, like with governments and many people, because everyone feels disaster affect everybody, right? What's the gender has to do with all of these things? So I think it might be quite an interesting kind of lay the foundation of why do we need to talk about gender? We have 14 people, but we have more people in the room. So I invite you to interact more. We have most people saying all of these matter, which is really great. We have some of you who choose one or the others. Yeah, very interestingly, like when we're talking about, and this is connected to your first slides, when some people were actually writing in about vulnerabilities and empowerment and all of that. And because disasters are not gender neutral, right? And the risk that is shaped by where we sit in our society and the power relations between different people, men and women, men and boys, and people of diverse gender identities and sexual orientations, you can see there can be the way that they're affected by disaster differently, depending on where they are in terms of social characteristics and all of that, and definitely influence the level of vulnerabilities in terms of access to information, service, or assets, or how much they're exposed. It depends on where they live, where they work, their mobility constraints, for instance, or the differences in their capacities, right? Capacity to cope and to respond to disaster, whether they have access to certain resources, network, or decision making, all shaped by the gender role and social norms. So someone was talking about intersectionality. I think it's kind of important for me to just lay it out pretty quickly. So in a fundamental, most important point here when we talk about why gender matters and why we need to look at intersectionality is because when we look at the gender inequality and the intersectional identities, we're really talking about a systemic driver of disaster risk. It's not just a characteristic that affects people, right? So this sort of trying to show you like this different aspect of ourselves, right? We have like sex, age, marital status, ethnicity, disability, wealth, all of these things. And when gender intersect with age and disability, income, and location, these could create compounded risks if you are in certain location, happen to be a woman with disability, living in a rural area with less access to basic services, or in the poor quintile. When all of that intersect, you have one in the middle, which is most deprived, which is a pre-existing condition. When it gets amplified during and after disaster, inequality can be amplified, right? So these are when we talk about intersectionality and make it more kind of practical in our world of disaster risk reduction and building resilience. We need to really look at who are the furthest left behind. And I think that this slide, I think the Tina, my colleague, has talked about it from the broad understanding of risk that UNDRR has brought to our constituency and stakeholders. But I want to zoom in to what Tina has already presented into the gender lens. So when you look at all those components that she already described so clearly, when we look at, for example, strong hazard, right? Strong hazard may not lead to disaster if exposure is minimized. So, for example, if warnings are accessible, if warning is trusted and inclusive, or reaching the diverse group of people and allow them to have a timely evacuation or protective action, the potential impacts of the hazard can be significantly reduced for a certain group of people. Or on the contrary, even small hazards can cause really, really massive disaster if exposure is high and vulnerability are significant. So, for example, we're talking about flash floods in informal urban setting. And as I mentioned, and connecting that with intersectionality that I explained in the previous slide. For example, if you look at compounded risks by gender and other type of inequalities, where women, maybe person with disabilities, or older person or marginalized group may face certain limitation in terms of access to safe housing, access to information that is needed for them, or resources, or being part of the decision making or on when and how and what to act, that's increasing their exposure tremendously. And it could constrain their ability to really prepare for and respond to this hazard. And linked to the last point around capability, when we come to this kind of like unequal starting point, right? The access to resources, skills, and coping mechanism is the factor that can or cannot help you to reduce the vulnerability and exposure level. So rather than seeing gender as a category of vulnerable groups, which is actually has been used quite a lot or been cited actually. So when it comes to gender, it's all about protection or the vulnerable groups that we need to focus on. I think it would be much more comprehensive and more useful to look at it and understand that integrating gender is not really about just adding social lens just because we have the moral conviction to do so, but it's really about improving accuracy, effectiveness of risk reduction itself. And if we were to talk about building disaster and climate resilience, this is where we need to go to accelerate progress in the next 5 years. And that's why this session is so important. And we, all of us in the gender stakeholder group, need to be able to engage with the broader stakeholders to be able to convey those messages to allow our agenda to be able to understood in a wider mainstream. So quickly on the history of the gender in DRR, and I think many of you have been engaged in that. This is for our cross sector or groups of people that may be relatively new to this. Obviously, pre-2000, women were framed as victims, right? But to be honest with you, even today, in many places, women sometimes are still framed as victims rather than people with their own voice and agency and choice, and very, very, very able to actually enable change and coming up with solution that is better and diverse, right? Better than we all coming together. So in early 2000, you have a little bit more recognition of gendered impacts, and then you have the Hugo framework for action that gender is recognized for the first time as an important in terms of participation and awareness, but still quite limited. And the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, I think, and coming in from the women movement myself and was not in the UNDRR, was quite kind of celebrated as the international framework that is an important step forward for gender to be recognized and positioned within the people-centered inclusive disaster risk reduction, with an emphasis on inclusive governance, the leadership, and the use of disaggregated data. But while the ambition has increased, the framework still have a lot to do to provide more concrete mechanism and indicator to systematically track the gender outcome. And here's, I think that as Tina mentioned in her presentation already about the guiding principle of the Sendai framework, I think it must be emphasized again that here there's an explicit recognition of gender and age and disability and cultural perspective that should be integrated in policy and practices, and the important roles and leadership of women and young people in this context. So it's quite an important piece of work in 2015. And if you think about it, 2015 was not that long ago that we are formally recognizing that diversity and how much the diversity bring diverse quality of solution and a possibility for us to do better. So we're moving from understanding the kind of traditional lens of disaster, like you probably hear this like cycle of disaster management, prevention, response, and recovery, towards more of managing systemic risk. And I think that's kind of like a key to even look at UNDRR as an organization name to become much more about managing risk itself, and how to be able to do that in a more effective way. So this is a piece of connection that I think would be important for all of us across different groups. So we have in this group from the survey, some of us are working in disaster, some of us are working in climate, some of us are human rights, gender advocates, but you will see that at the fundamental base of the sustainable development really is the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And within that, and I'm going to talk about the Sendai gap in a little bit, which I think many of you in this group have played a key role in bridging the remaining gaps in the Sendai framework itself to accelerate progress. But there is a very important overlap between the disaster risk reduction sector and the climate change and the Paris Agreement for climate change. And there's a huge emphasis on the climate action side and on gender action. And I think it's important to highlight this. Why? Because on the Paris Agreement is a legally binding document. So in terms of international norm and standard, it has a strong legally binding and statute for it, right? So the more we can amplify where there are the synergy between Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement for climate change, and we look at the Belém Agreement in the COPs, you can see that there was this whole like emphasis on gender that it's actually reinforcing each other, from having a program that is looking at gender action plan to infuse gender responsive approach to the entire program to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It actually goes hand in hand. And I think you see this in the COP, the last COP that was organized in Brazil, where Brazil itself are actually, as a president, pushing forward the protocol action, which UNDRR is playing a critical role in supporting the role of women in disaster and climate emergency. So when you look at cut across from the Agenda for Sustainable Development of the SDG and the Sendai framework, the Paris agreements, in the middle, you have the strong backbone of the legal human rights instruments such as the CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, on one hand, and the Convention on for the rights of person with people with disability. There, you will see it that connected with the gender of the humanity. You see inclusive disaster and climate resilience at the center of it all. And then on the right-hand side, I just outlined quite a few sustainable development goals that cross-cutting the agenda that we're talking about it today, because it's often easy for, even when I'm in UNDRR now, talking about gender, people zoom into the goal 5 without understand the connection between goal 5 and the rest of the SDG, that they go hands in hand. And it's actually a precondition to achievement of the SDG, and that was stated since 2015. So my colleagues, Tina, also have talked about the midterm review, but let me kind of zoom into what she has give the pretext to that and look into some of the critical areas of focus where we need to do more in the next 5 years. So you have the green, yellow, and red lights. The greens is where we're doing really well, so I'm going to leave it alone and not talk about it too much. But where we have a mixed review is around early warning system and risk information, international cooperation that can be enhanced. And this was a finding in the midterm review in 2023. Where we are not doing so well at all, and this is where the gender inclusion agenda comes into the fall, is the reduction of the number of affected people, or the reduction of direct disaster economic losses and disaster damage to critical infrastructure and basic services disruption. These are the areas where the progress has to be made in the coming years, and the integration of risk-informed approach and development and information there would be key to address the box in the red, as well as to look at enhancing and turning early warning system to be more inclusive and turn it to be green. So here we are with the Sendai gap in 2024 after the midterm reviewed. And if you look at it, also mirroring what Tina was presenting just a moment ago, when you're looking at all the pillars of the Sendai framework. So the Sendai gap really should not be seen as a separate. So one thing I realized that when we're talking about to the government constituents or the stakeholders, they sometimes understand the Sendai Gender Action Plan as another. Do we actually have to advocate for another plan outside of our national DRR strategy and plan? But I think one of the things that is important to clarify and to actually leverage the Sendai gap is to see this as a tool to work within the framework of national and local DRR policy strategy to then integrate it, the gaps that has not been addressed so well. So when I was asked to talk about the history of integration of gender into national and local DRR plans and program, this is precisely where the gaps are and where we need much more stronger efforts around enhancing sex and age and disability disaggregated data to understand the risk knowledge, because without that, it's really hard to then go into who to invest, where to invest, and how do we do better targeted preparedness and recovery and response, from early warning to access to critical basic services such as sexual reproductive health and rights, and respond to issues that are so great in challenges when it comes to gender-based violence, because it's actually intensified during disaster and crises. So the Sendai gap is meant to address those gaps by substantially increasing resource allocation activities and impact of gender responsive disaster risk reduction, and substantially decreasing gender related disaster risk, and address precisely the issues of of vulnerabilities and exposure. I encourage you to scan here. There's a little like scanner that you could see in details of what it means. But just to quickly highlight on the data side of the disaggregated data, right? It's true that the Sendai framework have put in the map the need for disaggregated data. But from then to now, as of 2025 in October, we have about 74 countries that reporting on sex disaggregated data. And that's not even half of all the countries reporting on the Sendai monitoring framework. And that's become an important and urgent priorities in the next 5 years in order to be able to have the right map towards the next 5 years to accelerate where we need to prioritize our investments. So just to give you, this is my last slide, and I think I'm a bit over time now, is the Sendai Gap at glance. And here you can also scan on the right-hand side, but just to show you the overview of it, right? In the 4 priorities area of the Sendai Gap, which I've already explained, and zooming into the data side is to have increased availability of sex and age and disability disaggregated data and use this to inform gender analysis. Now, there's a lot of confusion. I often hear gender disaggregated data. There's no such things commonly as gender disaggregated data, really, because if you look at the national system of national statistical official statistics, how many countries are actually disaggregated by gender and sexual orientation? No, most of the household survey are disaggregated by sex, male or female, right? So I think it's quite important for us, for those who said they're veteran advocate for data and disaggregated data, to use the right term so that when we're engaged with the statistic people in the mainstream crowd, they understand what we're talking about. We use sex disaggregated data to inform greater gender analysis, because only a few countries, some countries do disaggregated data by men, women, and then the other gender identities, right? But that's not very common. So therefore, I think that's give us a good starting point to look at some of these analyses. And I think one of the key things is that in the target A and B, where we actually lack the data, we still need to convince a lot of people why using those disaggregated data in terms of mortality rates can help inform our action when it comes to preparedness and response and recovery. And I think that's the work we need to do more. We have a number of people here who are a true veteran of advocate for women leadership and meaningful participation of women and marginalized group. And here, I think we have a lot to do to make it more than tokenistic, right? Like when we say meaningful participation doesn't mean that they're just there. There's different levels that we can measure. And it's something I'm advocating also in my organization, but you can also do in your own space as well. And move people where they can, right? In terms of participation, getting them to be in the room and have the space to speak when they don't have the space to speak, to be able to be part of the conversation is already a step. But even more meaningful is when their opinions actually counted in the design of the actions and implementation. And then the piece on investing in DRR, I think a lot of people talk about the lack of data and the lack of investments, and they kind of go hand in hand, like two sides of the same coin, because you can't possibly construct a model for greater investment in DRR resilience for women and marginalized group if you don't have the data on where they are. How do we focus on? Similarly, on the response and recovery. So they kind of critical gist. And I think something that I was trying to connect with Claudia and Vido and the other groups around data, because I truly convinced that that's where, otherwise we would spend the next 5 years and maybe the next 10 years complaining that we don't have data. So we need to try now in the next 5 years to see what can we consolidate. And that goes beyond UNDRR. That has to consolidate the power of UN Women, UNFPA, the other agencies that work on gender-related data, FAO, UNEP, whoever, to be able to consolidate that. And we're hoping that that will be able to be generated in a more systematic way. The hopeful part is that the last 5 years alone, or 4 years, there's a lot more gender data, a lot more sex and age and segregated data as various level because of that work of many of you. So I think that's it. I think there's a lot of reflection here around the voice and agencies of women, but I want to stop here. My presentation today is quite basic. but because of the diverse group, so this is the first session 101, but we can have more advanced conversation as we go along. Thank you so much for indulging me with a bit of overtime, and really.
Thank you so much, Rice, for quite a detailed and extremely informative presentation on history of gender. Yes, I see a lot of clap. I think we can take this moment to give both Tina and Rice like a big clap for getting all of us back to class to understand the Sendai framework, UNDRR, the history of gender and all that. I think colleagues, you're seeing all the claps that are going your way. Helped by the technology in Zoom settings. So now we have booked your time for 1 hour and a half. So we have almost 20 plus minutes. We would now like to take questions, and questions can be directed to both Tina and Rice at the same time. We'll take potentially 2-3 questions first, and then we'll ask them to respond. And then we'll do the same. Possibly can have 2-3 rounds. We encourage colleagues to be extremely sharp in terms of how they ask their questions. So avoid to, like over explain the question. And then, so possibly you can start with a question first for clarification, curiosity, etc. And then for the last round, we can open up for any comments, suggestions, any reflections. So you can please raise your hand. I see Troop. You have the floor.
Yeah, hi. It was a very nice presentations. Both the presentations was very informative, very nice, and very eye-opening and very crisp also. I have the one questions is that we have talking about the disasters and morbidities and other things, but I think migration is the most important outcome of the disasters. Not outcomes, but it happens because of the disasters. And migration means is the leaving their native place, leaving their own home, leaving their own land, and that has the more economic uh, rather than this more emotional setback for the migratory people. So how these frameworks and eyes and other people are looking at this one? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trupti, for the question on migration. I hope Tina and Race have noted it, but I think also as part of our discussions within the Women in Gender Stakeholder Group, we felt that there might be a need to have like a deep dive on internal displacement and migration as a result of disaster, but like happy to get your comment, your response to that. Any other question? I saw there was a question on how folks can share voluntary commitment. Of course, Tina, you have already shared the link, but possibly you can also say a word about that because there is interest on that. And then I think the other question, I don't know if it's a question or comment on certificate. Possibly we can give you certificate at the end of this political series you're planning to have a case to 6 also political session. So after that, now you're encouraging us to have like a proper examination in each certificate, but that was in a light note. But I think that speaks to the as a testimony of how informative the session has been. Sabrina?
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Sabrina, and I have actually two part of question regarding our progress and the inclusivity of our data. First is the Sendai progress that Tina's already mentioned before. As we have passed the midpoint toward 2030, Indonesia remains one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, constantly facing choices between development and risk. Globally, which of the 7 Sendai targets is currently lagging the most? because I remember that Tina also mentioned like the 7 target before, and also what the emergency measures does UNDRR recommend for high-risk nations like Indonesia to accelerate progress in this lagging area before 2030 deadline. And then the second one is about gender inclusive data from COP30. So we know that disaster impact women disproportionately in the grassroots level, with the upcoming BELAM adaptation indicators to be launched at COP30. How will these indicators align with Sendai's mandate for sex disaggregated data to ensure we are accurately measuring the real impact on women on the ground rather than just relying on a aggregate number? Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, especially also for bringing the link between the Global Goal and Adaptation Indicator and the Sendai indicator. It's in the alignment. ABM, and then we'll finish this first round with Chandel.
Yeah, thank you for your opportunity to speak in this platform. I'm ABM Hassan Jaman. I'm a International Climate Protection Fellow. I work with IDOS. And since I'm doing the intersectionality in my research work, so I have seen some of the things. So I do not have actually question. I do have some comments regarding these facts. So I saw the slides when Rice was showing the intersectionality, how do fact intersect. So I saw like one of the critical fact, maybe that was missing, like the casting system, the social stratification, like the lower strata, the people from the lower strata affects the most, and also the geographic location. I mean, if you think the rural is like the homogeneity, like there are some facts in the same community because there are some different geographical location in, and they have different contexts. So I think these two things were missing in that slides or some sort of things. Another thing is like when we do say the locally led adaptation or locally led disaster risk reduction, then also need to be clarified when we're talking about locality. Then how do we, what do we think, like who are the local actors? Uh, is it community? Is it local government? Is it CSO? Is it Astro? Like who are the local actors when we are talking local led disease. So I wanted to know about this more, like when you say locally led disaster risk reduction, who do you mean about?
Thank you so much, ABM, for those questions. I think potentially Tina and Rice possibly can have like a whole dedicated session on localization because it's such a missing conversation and misunderstood. And like I think that comes out quite strongly during the mid-term that we have not been able to achieve a lot of that. And this can be a space where we can enhance the understanding to really move the localizations agenda of the under Sendai framework. But last is Chandel, and then I'll pass it to Tina and Rice for response.
Well, yeah, localization kind of was my question around grassroots and like villages because people say cities as solutions, but I come from the Caribbean, so I think it's more like communities as solutions is what we're looking at. So I wanted more information you have around that. It was touched on with like the local DRR, but yeah, more information on like the scale that would be for communities slash, I guess maybe villages slash informal mechanisms. And also, I guess also the cultural loss gaps that comes with smaller like cities and villages and communities, because again, when a disaster happens, a kind of community can be completely lost, like completely lost, and like there's a gap in that information. And even if we're since measuring from 2015, there have been hurricanes in the region, at least in the Caribbean region, that have destroyed entire communities. I think you can check at least the Bahamas and Dominica. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
You're muted, Mishi.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Shandal. I think this is spot on localization and integration of the community. I think that's the whole essence of really disaster risk reduction, because disaster risk reduction happens at community level. But I'm not the expert today. Today I'm just a moderator, so I'll pass it to Tina. And then when Tina is done, you can pass it to Rice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all those questions. I took some notes and I hope I can cover most of them. So I'll start with the one on the voluntary commitments, which came through the chat. So essentially, and this maybe also lays the foundation for the localization question. As we know, of course, the kind of part of the guiding principles of the Sendai framework is that the primary responsibility lies on states. Member states need to prevent and reduce disaster risk, including through cooperation, of course. But it is a shared responsibility between the central government, the national authorities, sectors, and stakeholders as feasible, appropriate. To the national circumstances. So while we recognize national governments having the primary responsibility, there is an understanding that we need, as I mentioned earlier, all hands on deck. So in terms of the voluntary commitments as well, so national governments are requested to submit their commitments to the Sendai framework monitor, and that kind of goes to the official where you see where we are or are not on track. UN entities, UN agencies are requested to report through what is called the UN Plan of Action on DRR. So we understand where we are heading with our role of kind of coordinating DRR across the system. And then the Sendai framework, voluntary commitments, it really is a platform, an online platform that serves to incentivize stakeholders. So here, anybody, really all non-state actors, can submit their commitments, and I dropped the link in the chat. It's easier that way than spelling it out here. This being said, we can share the URL with you also after the call. But it helps, of course, publicize or give credit to the stakeholders who are working in this space as they share their commitments and their progress. But of course, it also gives us the opportunity to monitor, take stock of progress and impact, which we do, and we share then annual reports and things like that. And of course, a lot of the donors and governments are very interested in also understanding what non-state actors are doing to contribute to the Sendai framework. Now, in terms of, I'll kind of go in reverse order, in terms of the who is the locality, what do we mean, who are the local actors? I want to say everyone. Looking at it even from the stakeholder engagement mechanism perspective, yes, of course, we have the women and gender group. We also have a specific constituency for local authorities. We have local communities, youth, and so on. So there is NGOs as well. So you get the gist of it, right? From our perspective, we say all hands on deck. It means all hands on deck, and it really does go all the way to the grassroots community level. Now, what that looks like in reality will depend, of course, on the context. We have, let's say, better and maybe not as great examples of how much space there is for example, local communities to contribute to decision making and action. Our main counterpart from the UNDRR perspective, as a UN entity, is, of course, the member states. But fortunately, we have mechanisms like the stakeholder engagement mechanism where we can have the voice of stakeholders, non-state actors brought to global, regional, and to a certain extent, of course, national dialogues as well, policy, with an example being, for example, the PPED process, the protection of persons in the event of disasters. And this actually was my point also on, there was a whole point about intersectionality. A woman with disability was also saying that this is kind of her bread and butter. The idea through the SEM is that we're able to not just grant, if you will, we're not granting, the stakeholders are independent, but the constituencies remain independent. But one of the key ways that SEM adds value to its members is that it brings all these stakeholder groups together. So for example, in the PPED, the protection of persons in the event of disasters, the women and gender group, just like the persons with disability group, can review what the draft articles contain or what has been left out. You can have a look at what are the different member states advocating for. What does the women and gender group want to be considered? What would you like to see considered? But then how can you work collectively to advocate for inclusion? Together, your voice is so much louder. So maybe a youth organization or local authorities in country X have existing access reach networks that you can leverage. How can you ensure that the other groups, the other constituencies also use your key messages? So I think Rice was saying like move people where you can. And I think that comes like it applies within the stakeholder engagement mechanism. It applies to moving across groups and geographies and agendas. Very quickly, because I understand I'm taking a lot of time on migration. Obviously, migration is not our core mandate. It like it is for IOM, for example. But we recognize and we address it because disasters and climate change are obviously the major drivers of displacement as well. So as we address or as we're trying to reduce disaster risk, this is how it comes into play. We don't manage quote unquote, we don't manage migration directly, but we tackle the root causes. And we work with a number of organizations. And here again, there is a SEM stakeholder group specifically on displacement. So something maybe for you to, maybe they can come and speak in one of the webinars, or you can explore this topic a bit further. My last quick one on the targets where we are most behind, where we really are not on track are target C on reducing direct disaster economic losses and substantially reducing disaster damage to critical infrastructure. In the interest of time, I'm not going to list a whole list of recommendations. We have a separate work stream, for example, on infrastructure, a very topical now ahead of the World Urban Forum as well. So there, and again, I need to say, SEM also has a working group on the new urban agenda. So again, a lot of intersectionality here, a lot of possibilities for stakeholders to come together to also address some of these topics. But I'll hand it over to Rice, knowing that I took quite a bit of time. Apologies for that.
No worries. I think that you make my job easier, so I won't repeat the stuff that you already cover. Just a few kind of targeted points on Sendai. I just use this as an opportunity for promotion. Sendai Gap voluntary commitment. I just share in the chat how to report. So there's a step-by-step flyers in there for those who are work related to gender to help facilitate the reporting of the commitments there. The second point about the data, I think we can have the whole discussion about the data work, but I think that one of the biggest challenge with the data and official data is the disaggregation and ensuring that once you disaggregate it, it's still representative of all. It's one of the things that you mentioned about that overlapping or that connection between the climate adaptation and disaster is a very good one to say. And I wanted to highlight that there UNDRR and UN Women, I understand, have joined force in advocating to be a custodian agency of some of the new indicators there. And this is a good news. We started to explore some collaboration there because, as you know, when we talk about gender aspects of the indicator, some of these has to be looked at the individual level, but a lot of data that have been collected are at the household level as a unit of analysis, right? So when you take household as a unit analysis, you miss what's going on underneath the household level, the power relation, who making the decision, who's actually have access to resources, and there fortunately maybe more work to capture individual level data, which I'm very hopeful that some of those work on gender, environment, and this disaster data would be able to allow us to do more of those kind of analysis. My last point really, because Tina has covered a lot of ground, so I won't repeat what she's already covered because they're not necessarily gender specific. On intersectionality, I wanted to appreciate ABM points. It's a very complicated issues, and please do not take my slides. I just want to make a disclaimer here. I should have in my presentation as a comprehensive set of social identity. So there are many more than what is there. And I'm surely miss probably a tons of them. But in the interest of trying to show a wide range of participants here who have different level of understanding in terms of practically how do we look at those intersectionalities and the points. And definitely there's so much nuances when it comes to geographic locations, which resonate with another colleagues who talk about localization. But Mishis is right. It's warrants another session perhaps for another couple hours for us to give them a justice to actually talk about that, because even when you talk about unit of analysis of local government, okay, let me just pick one, okay, local government alone, and the debate around city, municipalities, and all of that of different countries is massive. So I think that it's not easy for us to generalize it, and I think Tina made it very clear and nicely put it in a short time frame of being specific in terms of when we talk about localization. So, but oftentimes I hear your voice because you work on the ground and very much connected to our constituency. Sometimes there could be a lot of frustration, right, when we're not being specific enough, which is true. Because when we talk in this forum like this, we have to move with the time. So we kind of talk about it almost as if it's a singular unit of analysis, which is not always fair. So thanks for raising that point, that we need to be contextualized and do not forget that they're very complex issue. So back to you, Nishi.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I think just to add up on the localization, because as the major group, like one of the work that we really center is the localization of the Sendai framework. And on the localization, for example, what it says or what it is aiming for is really to ensure that the work has been tailored, like global risk, understanding of global risk reduction is tailored to the local realities, centering the community-led action, but also prioritizing local leadership. And this is understanding that the risk can be socially specific. Vulnerability and exposure can vary from like one location to the other based on like multiple sectors. So as Rice and colleagues have said, you cannot have like a one-fit-all model, because that will be going like completely against, because you'll standardize very complex sets of realities, vulnerabilities, and exposure. That's why most of our work is the first priority is to understand, like the risk, and that's forced us to really deep dive on understanding the social constraints, the economic factor, inequalities, and all that stuff. So I don't see any other questions being raised, and we have 4 minutes left. So I would wish to now move it to the closure unless Claudia, there is anything? All right. So as we close, I would like to, before, I invite you, my colleagues, my speakers, to say their last word, just to note that this is one of the series of the sessions. So this was the first one, and we'll be running another series of sessions. The second one was deep dive on the understanding the Sendai Gender Action Plan. Of course, Rice has given us a test of it and an example, but we wanted to really have understanding of an entire document and what it is. But also in that session, information will be shared next, we'll also invite feminists to also share their experience on implementing the gender action plan and the gender work that they are doing, so that there is also a practical experience on the work that feminists are doing in the space of disaster risk reduction. So look forward for that information. But in the meantime, if you can invite you to use the chat function and respond to two questions. The first question is, what is the topic that you would like to learn more in relation on in this intersection? And the second question, to give us your feedback of the session, like how do you feel now? Do you feel that you have learned you are getting, I think, the cloud questions, are you now moving to the pro? If you are Elena, is that now disaster becoming your cup of tea? Are you more confident? Just getting your reflection for colleagues. And while you're doing that, happy to open one space for anyone who would love to share their reflection of the sessions in terms of how the context was shared, was it useful, etc., as we're hearing from colleagues on what should be the next, what is the interest of the next session and your reflection of the session. Anyone volunteer to share their feedback of the session?
We're seeing a lot of good comments in the chat.
Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead,
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much. I think from Nigeria is 1 minute to noon, so it's safe to say good morning, good afternoon. Actually, I want to appreciate this education series. It is very, very helpful, and it's informative, and it is a learning for me. And the fact that the background of the UNDRR double arrow, and looking at it from the gender perspective, and looking at telling us everything about the working groups and the different sections, and also bringing about the impacts that the UNDRR has made over the years, and also giving us a perspective. For me, is a perspective because I am working on there's a project I'm working on at a research I'm conducting, looking at the women's perspective, especially around the flooding, how community resilience has helped them. So this has helped me a lot. While the presentation was going on, I was jotting down a lot of key information that will enrich my research, and I'll come back when I think I need more information. But for me, generally, this is like a launching pad, a foundation that will help to bring in more participants, more members into the group, because we need to expand our space, our working space, to ensure that more women are involved, because really when there is disaster, when there is any form of hazard, women are at the forefront to ensure that the risk is not actually overwhelming. Thank you very much. I think that is because this is closing already, let me not start to talk too much. So that is also my reflection. I am Dr. Richard Misarupi from Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your reflection. I totally share. I have been in this space for the longest time, been part of the a midterm review, but also like I was taking a lot of notes as well. So thank you so much, colleagues, for that. My colleague Claudia have also shared the link to join the Women and Gender Stakeholder Group in UNDRR if you want to do so. But also we will continue to share invitation to this learning session in the other mailing list that you are also part of. So with that, allow me to now to invite our guest. As you have noted, is unlike the normal webinar, in most of the webinar, at least the one that I have been on, like in 1 hour, you have like 10 speakers. But because we want to do deep dive, we said we'll have maximum 2 speakers so that we can give them the time they need to share all the knowledge and skills. And I think this has proved to be like such a workable model, like nobody was rushed to finish, and we have like enough decent interpretation, space for asking questions and seeking reflections. So with that, allow me to invite Tina and Rice to say any takeaways, and kindly do accept our sincere appreciation for availing your time to come and join the Feminist and share your knowledge and expertise. So I'll start with Tina and then we'll go to Rice.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be very, very brief because I have 2 points only. First of all, I want to thank you, Mishi, Claudia, for having organized the session and giving us the opportunity to speak. And I also want to very much thank you, all the participants, for your active participation. I think it's great that the chat function was so active and people were asking questions, so really appreciate it. And then I want to leave you with my request of we collectively at UNDRR want to hear from you. So please share any key insights and lessons that you've learned in your communities and societies wherever you operate. We want to see the impact stories. We want to see how stakeholders are moving the needle and changing the world. So please share your work with us. There are many ways to do that, and we just want to hear from you so that we can also give you the credit that you deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. Rice?
Thank you so much. I love partnering with Tina because she makes my job easier all the time, and she's so great. So I'm really glad to be invited for the first time to work with you, Mishi and Claudia and Tina and colleagues here and friends. I hope that we will get many more opportunities to engage as we move towards the APM-CDR and the global platform, as well, and many other platforms that you are in different regions. So I want to thank you here for this warm welcome and the opportunities to exchange with you. And I hope to continue to engage with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My comrade Claudia, do you have any last word?
No, just yes, an extended thank you to Rice and to Tina and to the wonderful audience. And yes, just an encouragement. If you are interested in this work, it's such interesting and engaging work. So if you're interested, the WGSU is a very open and just, like really keen to be engaged the group. So please feel free to join. And over to you, Mishi.
All right. So with that, look forward for the next email regarding the next sessions. We'll try to make it interesting. Rice have taught us like it can work to have like interesting Slido and all the poll. And happy to share the video that we couldn't play. Soon after this, we'll send you the notes, presentation, the recording, and we'll also embed the video so that we are able to watch it. And thank you so much for joining us for 1 hour and a half. In the afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Truly appreciate, and let's keep doing the work that we are doing best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.